It's the 1870s. In Europe, new ideas are occupying the minds of thinkers and artists. Portugal, however, is stagnant. The old values of Romanticism, an artistic movement of great importance in the first half of the century, continue to be the most influential. Nature, the individual and dreams were manifested in literature, painting and sculpture, often with an extreme of emotion and sensitivity. Abroad, writers such as Honoré de Balzac and Gustave Flaubert provide realism with vitality. This is a current which, as the name suggests, takes reality as its main source of inspiration. In Portugal, the works of romantic writers such as Camilo Castelo Branco or António Feliciano de Castilho are still at the centre of literary life. It is in this context that a group of Portuguese students rebels against immutability. Understanding that they share ideas about the need to modernize and update the Portuguese intellectual and artistic scene, these individuals speak out in favor of the country's cultural modernization. They are men with a keen sense of observation of the society in which they operate. As a consequence, friction begins with individuals in the old artistic currents. Realists and romantics are opposed. Champions of new ideas, the realists published their criticism in newspapers and broadsheets. From Coimbra, through the hands of individuals such as Antero de Quental, Ramalho Ortigão, Eça de Queirós, Oliveira Martins and Guerra Junqueiro, new thought spread. And it is this opposition between the old and the new, realism and romanticism, that is called the Coimbra Question. But they were not content with the transformation of art and literature and felt in them the need to bring Portugal closer to the rest of Europe, to develop society in new directions. So these men also intervened in political issues. In 1871, As Farpas was published, in which Ramalho Ortigão and Eça de Queirós made lively and fierce criticisms. They positioned themselves above all as rationalists, positivists, defenders of science. Furthermore, they proclaimed themselves as republicans and anti-clerical, thus questioning two of the pillars of the Portuguese political and social system. Ideas spread and the group expanded. The French intellectual world in particular proved important to these individuals who began to meet at the Casino Lisbonense Democratic Conferences, popularly known as Casino Conferences. They began on March 22, 1871 and ended on June 26 of the same year. Antero de Quental was the main driving force behind the organization. The conference's short duration was due to the intervention of the Portuguese government, which prohibited their continuation, alleging attacks on essential doctrines. It was therefore an action of censorship which led to strong protests. The conferences were cancelled, but the new currents were spreading. In writing, some authors positioned themselves in a transition space between Romanticism and Realism. It is the case of Júlio Diniz, the pen name of Joaquim Gomes Coelho, doctor and writer. His work is relatively scarce. Affected by tuberculosis, he ended up dying at the age of 31 on September 12, 1871. Even then, he left a legacy of considerable importance and a notorious portrait of remarkable moments in the country's history. It is the case of the matter of the end of burials in churches, which appears in A Morgadinha dos Canaviais. In the literary field, above all, Eça de Queirós stands out. The work of this Portuguese writer and diplomat generated significant controversy. It is often considered that his greatest exponent is in Os Maias, Episodes of Romantic Life, a work with tragic characteristics which presents a portrait of Lisbon society at the end of the century. O Primo Basílio, Cousin Basílio, also speaks of Lisbon. His most controversial work, however, is O Crime do Padre Amaro, The Crime of Father Amaro, with its unflattering portrayal of clerical life in the city of Leiria. In painting, one can also notice a move away from the academic neoclassical and romantic styles, favouring realism, naturalism and, in certain cases, impressionism, although less intensely. The most sounding names are José Malhoa, Silva Porto, Columbano Bordal Pinheiro and Rafael Bordal Pinheiro. They portray the world they see, moving away from mythology and idealized visions. There is a particular appreciation for interior scenes, but also for paintings of national rurality. In turn, the sculptor's gaze, previously focused on great names and figures, or on gods and goddesses in antiquity, now focuses on praising the Portuguese people and national heroes. The famous figure that still accompanies Portuguese imagination is created, Zé Povinho, conceived in 1875 by Rafael Bordal Pinheiro. In architecture, it is the time of railways and large bridges, such as the Dom Luís Bridge in Porto and the Rossio train station in Lisbon. All this interventiveness is not enough for them, though. The 70s generation is not satisfied. Change, in their view, does not come quickly or sufficiently. Among them, there is a feeling of disillusionment, impotence, insufficiency, and above all, an unshakable frustration. Despite their efforts, Portugal continues its path on the margins of Europe. This is why they are sometimes called the defeated in life. Despite all the results of their efforts, unable to look at themselves proudly, the men of the 70s generation feel above all the negative, pessimistic spaces, in a certain individualistic way, as they cannot admire progress and the generalized picture. They live above all in their inner life, determined in dissatisfaction. Despite their struggle, their ideas, their work, they are largely romantic.